Let me begin by saying that at the last meeting, either because of microphone imperfections or my speaking voice or some combination thereof, I believe there were difficulties, especially with the recording. I was mortified to hear myself, and I actually listened to the recording, and we've tried to solve that. But if you're here in the room and cannot hear me or any other member up here, raise your hand. If you are at home listening, if you'll type into the chat, and we'll attempt to rectify this time around. First order of business is approval of the agenda. The agenda was circulated. Are there any changes or additions?
I'd like to propose an addition, which is to discuss the openings on the Historic Preservation Committee. There are two vacancies, one for a 3-year.
All right, we'll add that to the agenda, and we can actually
Okay.
give the details under
Certainly.
council member updates. Any further additions?
Yes, I'd like to make an addition, please, to move to, well, I mean, to accept or approve a contract for a new archivist.
We'll add that to new business. With those two additions, are there any other changes or additions to the agenda? If not, all in favor of adopting?
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Move to the approval of the minutes of the May 13 town council meeting. As circulated, to get it on the table for discussion, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the May 13, 2024 town council meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. A second.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote on approval of the May 13 town council meeting minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're running blessedly ahead of schedule. We'll move to presentations by town residents. If you have a presentation, if you'll step to the microphone, give your name and address.
Hi there, Steve Welker, 10705 Weymouth Street. I'm here in my official capacity as the president of the Garrett Park Citizens Association. We've been in discussions with the pool and with Mayor Keller and various other people, the band. We've been exploring very earnestly moving the parade for the 4th of July to terminate at Cambria Park. And I want to emphasize exploring. No decisions have been made. Nothing is final. We can immediately turn this car around. But we wanted to figure out whether or not this is something that we could do. And the reasoning behind it is we felt there's always been a bit of a tension between the termination of the parade at Penn Place and the pool events, which go underway shortly after. And people tend to start to disappear from the events at Penn Place. And it's just it kind of takes the wind out of our sails. And we were thinking maybe we can build and synergize with the pool events outside at Cambria Park, have the band still go.
The band would be where?
The band is in discussion, we're in discussion with the band. And again, I'm happy to hear opinions from everyone about this. My thought would be, it would be at the home plate at Cambria Park, right outside the pool. I think that would be close enough to the energy sources that we would require from the pool, which they've tentatively said that we could use. Everything's tentative. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, get that out on the public record that we're doing it. And happy to hear people's responses, thoughts. I also wanted to say that, we put out a poll to bring back the grilling. Seems like, people really care about that. And I've actually heard a lot of great stories about the grilling and getting a hamburger there for the last 20 years. And also it's been suggested to me, and I'm persuaded by it, that it sort of adds to the communal feel of the party, and maybe it would be more of a party if there was more grilling and people participating in the food delivery. It's our understanding that we would probably have to go legit on this one and get a county permit, which we would have to do that pretty soon to sell food and not get sued. Should anyone get food poisoning, I don't think that ever happened, but you never know. But anyway, we don't have grills. It allegedly there's a grill below Garrett Park Nursery School, and I would love to explore and find it. But so far, while there are no volunteers to help cook and sell, we don't have grills. So if you know someone who has a grill and wants to schlep it over, where they're schlepping it to, TBD, but still, if you have a grill, just putting that out there. And with that, I have taken enough of your time, so thank you very much, and good to see everybody.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Do you require any approvals from the town for if you amend your plan to hold the event at Cambria Park?
So we love working with the town and addressing any concerns they have. So we put on a brew fest at Cambria Park, and we worked very closely with the town to get proper permitting, address bathrooms and things like that. And we're happy to do that again. I don't want to be aggressive or say, we don't need your approval or anything like that. Certainly we want your buy-in. And if we don't get buy-in, then that's certainly another conversation. But that's how I feel about that. Certainly doing it at Penn Place, we've never asked permission to do.
So I guess it's kind of a loaded question, but actually Don is here, so I would just ask. Have you discussed this with the pool and that sort of stuff? Like what they have in mind?
Yeah, yes, we've definitely kept the pool in the loop. They've addressed parking concerns, traffic like that, and certainly helped steer us in a correct route there. So for example, the parade route, any car that's participating in the parade would stay on Claremont, and we would ask everyone to not park at the terminus of the parade. We would encourage parking at the school, and we would also solicit volunteers to help ensure that no one's blocking anyone's driveway on the 4th of July. So hopefully it's not really a volume increase. At most, it's a durational increase in traffic matters at Cambria. But yes, we've been in touch with the pool, in touch with the band, in touch with residents, local residents, so and happy to be in touch with anyone else too.
And out of curiosity, how would the parade route go? I mean, we know obviously it comes up here to the corner, we went across at the stoplight and then kind of go to the pool, or how are you figuring that?
You would cut down Waverly, you hit the corner at the tennis courts, take Montrose, and then you take that fastest route down to get to Cambria Park via the roads.
Yep.
And then that little cut through.
Fair
It'll
enough.
be just bikes, walkers, cars. Your the fire truck.
Cool, thanks.
So presumably the town's role is approving the closure of streets for the additional streets on the parade route.
Do you all close streets for this? I actually don't even know. I mean, we've always had traffic volunteers to help, prevent any sort of mishaps. Yeah, it's not something that we've historically sought, I don't think, closure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the parade route has been so static for so many years that it's been happening de facto.
Right. Right, and
But we
then,
want to make sure that we have good notice to residents on those additional streets that something that they're not used to happening would be happening that day. And I know you would make that notice for the most part, but I think the town would want to also give it some
agreed,
official oomph.
yes.
So maybe we should do that now, given that this is the last meeting before.
Yeah, I'm not
That's
sure
it,
it has
is
to
it
be the
not?
town council or whether the town manager could provide that support.
Yeah, so my only instinct and even maybe my hesitation to come here today is I'm not trying to start a firestorm before I know I have a fully baked plan. We're still trying to, if we can't even do it, it's like, why even?
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Well, no, I guess I'm just recommending that when you make that decision that you coordinate with the town office so they can also amplify the messaging about traffic safety that day.
Absolutely, absolutely. We would definitely do that.
You just. We go to that.
Aren't there some grills up on the hill behind the pool?
Yeah, we're concerned about moving those grills. They basically sit there year round and maybe they might fall apart if we move them.
Okay.
But we are confident if we grill. And we are prepared to use food trucks as a backup if we can't get the grills, but if we grill, we're confident that residents will come out of the woodwork and actually bring their grills. Not me, someone else, hopefully. But yeah, that's a job there, bring your grill. Yeah, or we'll move it from you, but.
All right, anything further?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Any further presentations by residents?
Okay, I know this is on the agenda. Oh. Thanks, Steve. This is on the agenda for later, which is the subject of the gate at Kenilworth.
Quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you have any comments for Steve? How do you guys feel being that you represent the pool?
Steve and the other CA leadership and the pool have a great ongoing conversation about tons of stuff. So we're in lockstep. We've been talking to Jean, who's the liaison now for the community, as you know.
Yep.
And as he said, we talked about parking, we talked about power, which I confirmed today wasn't causing any problems. We have the van plugged into the same boxes, etc.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Donna Calajon. I live at 11314 Kenilworth Avenue. Second from the gate on the left, across from the Yandell property. Thanks for letting us have some time and happy to answer any questions. And I just want to say that there are a lot of opinions and kind of emotional ones about the gate. Like most things at Garrett Park, these comments are not in any way meant to be critical of the folks who want to open the gate or who have other concerns related to it. You all have seen that I've commented previously via email, and I have copies of these remarks if anybody would like them to refer back to during your conversation. And my partner Debbie and I think several folks who are here who live in the area have commented that we believe maintaining the retractable gate, which is that's what I like to call it, as it is, creates a safer environment for people walking, jogging, riding their bikes, walking their dogs, which is a lot of folks, including certain members of the town council and mayor in our neighborhood. On the other hand, spending the money to repave, regrade, recurve everything past the gate, so on the Rokeby side of the gate, would undoubtedly be a six-figure expense, another six-figure expense for the town. And we do not think that makes sense to add another controversial six-figure expense to the town. We're also spending the time and money and energy on Yandell Park, which I imagine we'll talk about next. You'll see me again next month, probably, because that will be on the agenda. And it seems counterintuitive to us that you would want to increase traffic in front of a park that is intentionally meant to be a quieter, more contemplative kind of park, per the donor's wishes. What I want to comment on tonight, though, briefly, is the survey and its results. So I'm not a statistician, but I did get an A in statistics in 1985. I have, however, been involved in digital marketing, and survey research during my career. And the purpose of a survey is to collect unbiased information from which we can draw conclusions, clear conclusions. And with all due respect to those who created the survey, I do not believe that this survey achieves those goals. Number one, the anonymous nature of it means, and the fact that SurveyMonkey, which I think Kayla confirmed for me was a tool you used, does not effectively keep folks from providing multiple answers. I could give an answer on my phone and go to my laptop and give another answer. and go to a coffee shop and give another answer. And so to me, then it's unclear the number of respondents we actually had and how many of the comments that were made were unique comments. Secondly, all residents are not on the listserv that it was sent to. I don't know what percentage of residents are on the listserv, but I know it's not all of them. So that does leave out some important voices. I think the first question is vague about transit in town. And I don't understand why there wasn't a question specifically about the gate itself. That is the subject. And then finally, it has inherent bias in the results because the only people who were asked to explicitly give comments were the ones who had had a problem. Despite that, I think the survey really helped to kind of boil down the issues and get us to a point where we understand what is the issue. And it boils down to two things. Number one, driver confusion. Right? So there's a lot in there about I didn't get my DoorDash. I had to walk to the gate to pick up my packages. My packages got delivered to the other side of the gate. And that is completely valid and a pain in the butt. This can be pretty easily rectified by engaging with the maps and driving maps like Waze. Waze does not show that it is a through street. I did research on this. It shows the break. Apple Maps and Google Maps, all you have to do is have enough trusted people go in and comment on the inaccuracy of the map. And they will change it. In fact, several days ago, I went on and commented that this is actually a closed street. And today I put in directions from 7 different locations around Montgomery County to Chris Fishman's house. And not one of them put the driver down. Every single one of them turned off at Clyde or Altamont. So I think this is very rectifiable. I want people to get their falafels. And I think if the town was willing to make a comment to those apps, it would serve well because they would be viewed as a very trusted source by the apps. The second issue, which is frankly in my opinion, the only issue, is our empathy to respond to the issues related to our neighboring children. I had a chance to talk with our neighbor's mother to better understand the door-to-door issue that was in the comments about this particular child being able to access the door-to-door guarantee of busing. Well, we came to a quick agreement that he will never have to do door busing. Because, and Joe's gonna come up and talk about this a little bit. I'm finishing, it's going too long. Because Rokeby is a cul-de-sac, the bus will never go to their house to pick him up. Because then they have to back out to get to turn around either way. So the question is really a loop or about that. And I just wanted to make sure we're all clear on that because it's a very compelling situation to want to get to that door-to-door coverage. I really empathize with that, but it's just not realistic in this case. And so I think as we're considering possible solutions, we should be thinking about things that are realistic given contours of the streets. Thanks very much.
So just so I understand, your position is you'd like to keep the gate as it is and not
Yes.
open it. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe May. I live at 11312 Kenilworth Avenue, which is 3 blocks, 3 houses from the gate. In addition to what Donna said, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee regarding our views as they pertain to the gate at the end of Kenilworth Avenue, and that is to maintain the retractable gate. While we could use the survey to support our position, we're reluctant to do so for reasons, including those that Donna mentioned. That said, I would like to point out that 65% of the survey respondents are in favor of retaining the retractable gate. 80% of respondents living within 10 houses of the gate have not experienced an issue with the school bus attempting to navigate the gate. 70% of respondents within 10 houses of the gate have not experienced an issue with delivery drivers. 70% of respondents rarely drive to the north end of Kenilworth Avenue. And 71% of respondents walk the north end of Kenilworth Avenue at least 3 times each week. 38% walk it daily. Regardless of whether the gate is open or closed, vehicles traveling north on Rookie beyond Kenilworth must either turn around at the cul-de-sac, in a driveway, or at the gate. I think most would agree that backing up and turning around is much safer at a dead end than at an active intersection. That concludes my comments.
So if it was an active intersection, they wouldn't have to back up or turn around, right?
Oh, yeah, I mean, because north of the Kenilworth intersection where the gate is,
Right.
there's a cul-de-sac there, cannot get out. So if you drive that gate open or closed, you still have to figure out some way to turn around and come back.
You have a turnaround either way, either at the end with the dead end of Kenilworth or in, where Kenilworth and where it could be joined, or at the very end of Rokeby. It just seems like a really tortured argument with this thing with the
Right.
turning around. So, I mean, if you have a continuous street, you just loop around.
Kind of work the agenda.
Okay.
We're in.
So just so I understand, your position is to keep it closed or keep it working, but keep it closed, right? Thank you.
Regarding the survey also, I just happened to notice that about 23% of respondents do not live on any of the streets listed in the survey. That's like 38 people. That's not to say that people on the side of Strathmore don't have to say, but it's 25% of the total number of people that responded. So I think it's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there further presentations from residents? Very well, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the council resolution thanking Mayor Welch for her leadership of the town of Garrett Park.
All right. So Chris asked me if I would, make this presentation, and I'm very honored to do so. The council and the town staff collaborated to put together a resolution to thank Mayor Joanna Welch for her service and her leadership with the town, over the past not only 2 years of her mayorhood, but also as a previous town council member and a volunteer in town. A few highlights as a resolution include commending her advocacy for the town hall renovation with the state and securing a $300,000 state grant to support the renovation work. But also her innovative outreach, working with, reaching out and inviting local teams to help deliver surveys door to door to every resident in town to provide input on the concept plans as a part of an outreach campaign. And really, Mayor Welch moved forward from what had been a pretty vague general discussion about the town council renovation. She was able to move it forward to a more clear concept plan and cost estimate so that we would be able to get that $300,000 state grant. A few other points are her advocacy for infrastructure and safety improvements, town parks, and grants to help us to complete the renovation, or not the renovation work, the development work for both the Yendel Park and also the Grotto Park. And also to get us a tax duplication payment from the county. That's some hard dollars and cents benefits that we have received from her work. I want to read one thing out at the end here. Mayor Welch has been both a colleague and a friend who will be missed by the town council, the employees of the town of Garrett Park, and town residents in her role as mayor. Would you like to come up and receive the fund?
Thank you. If Wells Park didn't already have a name, I think we know what the playground equipment should be named.
I believe it's already called that.
The next order of business on the agenda is a report on the 2024 town election. And I'll call Jenny Granick, the chief judge of election.
Hello. Normally this report would be 1 minute. The organization, planning and communication of this election cycle was flawless thanks to town staff. There was a wonderful turnout. We rang the bell at town hall. And everything that was within our control went very well. The reason that I really wanted a few minutes with you is to make sure that you were aware of some issues we had with the vendor. As you hold the purse strings and will be deciding whether to allocate budget monies for a renewal of the contract. On election day, when we went to open the polls, it was discovered that the scanners had been left in test mode, both units. So we were essentially without the equipment until around noon on election day. As from the voters' perspective, it was not a problem because the staff had already made sure that the ballot box was right there. So from the voters' perspective, it was sort of seamless. But it did cause, it was a major hiccup. After we had published the results, we received an email that called into question the way that some of the numbers tallied up. And that caused us to go back and take a look at the count. The first place that we looked was, if you recall, there was a choice on the ballot that said none of the above. 7 people had chosen that. It seemed like an unusually high number. So that was the first area that we took a look at. Town staff pulled the ballots, and in fact, people had misinterpreted the instructions and had marked not only that box, none, I choose to vote for none, but also candidates. The vendor had never communicated clearly to us that their technology couldn't handle the choice the way we had expected, which was that would be the one and only choice. If you marked anything else, the scanner should have rejected the ballot. So that's what caused us to go back. We chose to reject the 5 people who marked their ballots incorrectly. We didn't want to, we wanted to keep our handling of rejected ballots consistent. And therefore we issued revised results. It in no way affected the outcome of the election, but we wanted to be sure that everything added up and every vote had been accounted for accurately. So that's really the reason that we've received revised results. We also put together a report that goes into a little more detail on what happened with the vendor. I think I speak on behalf of my fellow judges, Suzanne Kurt and Louise Stamorowski. We felt that up till now, using the scanning technology has worked very well. It has been efficient. It's a classic cost benefit analysis for an uncontested election where you have 200 votes. Some people feel it's overkill. But in this, we did have problems with the vendor on election day. So
Can I ask a quick question? So when you realized that it was on test mode, what was involved to make it on function mode or whatever, play mode? Or
so that there's a technician on site. He's in touch with the tech people at the company. They were unable to coach him over the phone. There was nothing that could be done. They put replacement machines in a van and a guy drove them
wow,
to Garrett Park from New Jersey.
wow,
So
wow.
Would you two questions. First is, assuming a contested election, would you recommend that we continue to use the automated scanning?
Again, weighing the cost against, it is efficient. People seem to enjoy using it. We feel that it's been very good technology up until this past election.
How many elections was it used prior without?
They started using it in 2020, for when the pandemic was on us.
And is it a lot harder, resource wise, human labor wise with, I mean, just counting ballots? I mean, you were still able to do it in a timely way that evening, right?
Yes, what essentially happens is that all the ballots get divided up into tranches. People sit around, the judges, staff, go through counting, cross-checking. It adds several hours onto a long day, but it can be done, and it has been done up until 2020. That was the way that votes were tallied.
Would you have a problem working with the same vendor again, or would you recommend we seek somebody new?
I haven't been able to, I haven't spoken with Barb, so I don't know what her communications with Electech were, what excuses they gave, what explanation they gave. So I think that's something that Barb is actually better able to speak to. I would suggest that depending on what her thoughts are, you might want to do a vendor review.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the judges of election. We appreciate it. Just to clarify one point, with reference to uncontested elections perhaps being easier, I believe, and Barbara Matthews, I'll ask you to confirm this, that a decision on whether to employ a vendor for election day needs to be made well before the point at which we know whether it will be a contested election or not. So is that correct?
That is correct. So typically we bring forward the proposed like nominating meeting date and the petition deadlines to you all at your February meeting. At that same February meeting, we also get direction on whether or not to use a vendor for scanning technology.
So the decision may turn on any number of pragmatic and policy determinations, but whether the election is contested is not one of them. All right. Thank you again. And we'll probably revisit that ere long. The town manager's report, including the May financial report.
Sure. Thank you. Included in your agenda packet is the financial report for the month of May. Probably just want to call out one item for you. In the month of May, we did process payment to DNF Construction for the site and drainage improvements project at the community center. When I brought this forward to you all for contract award, we were estimating at that time that the project would cost a little over $92,000. As a reminder, those initial price proposals from DNF Construction were unit priced. So as we indicated at that time, the town would only be invoiced for the actual quantities and work completed. The project did come in significantly under budget at just under $80,000. That's probably the only item of note I was going to mention about the financial report, but certainly if there's any questions about the report for May, I'd be happy to answer them. Kind of moving on to the renovation of the town office. As I had noted in the memo, we were waiting, our general contractor was waiting on an inspection by WSSC, which needed to follow the issuance of a permit. Our general contractor did contact me this afternoon to let me know that they had obtained the close-in permit. They have requested an inspection by WSSC tomorrow. Once they have gotten through the WSSC inspection, they will be calling for an inspection by Montgomery County, which is also necessary for the close-in. Right now, you'll see, for those of you who've been in the office, there's open framing. They need to be able to assess that. So once we have those two inspections behind us, the general contractor will resume work, hanging drywall and things of that nature. So unlike the previous work stoppages because of permitting, these were expected. In regard to the town hall renovation, many of you might recall that back in March, I did file an application for congressionally directed spending, also known as earmark spending, with the offices of Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen. They did a joint application process this year. The requested amount of the grant I was seeking was $500,000, which is the maximum that can be requested under the particular funding authority for which we applied. As you might recall, we did receive some conflicting information from the Maryland Historic Trust as well as the Historic Preservation Office about our eligibility for this particular pot of money. I went with the answer from the Montgomery County Planning Department, and we did file that application. On last week on June 6th, I did receive an email from the offices of Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen, letting me know that they basically supported our project. They have submitted it to the Senate Appropriations Committee. To quote the email, we agreed that supporting your project would be important to Maryland and a good use of federal taxpayer funds. So there's still quite a few steps to get through. The next step will be for the appropriation committees in the Senate to review all of the requests that have been submitted by the various senators. Basically, they will audit the applications to make sure that they do meet the technical details of that specific funding authority. So if there is an issue, I think that's where it will be noted. And they will then determine which funding request will be funded or not due to eligibility or other factors. They had also shared in their email that the Appropriations Committee will make public the list of projects that are included in the draft bills ahead of their scheduled markups. And that once that list of projects become public, I will receive a notification from both senators' offices on the outcome. So at least we're still in the hunt. Certainly, if our senators had not chosen to advance their project, we'd be dead in the water at this point. From a timing standpoint, it will take basically into the fall before we actually have a definitive answer on whether or not that funding application is successful or not. Just as a reminder, as I had mentioned at a prior meeting, there ended up not being any specific funding category for which we qualified on the House side of things.
I had a quick question, Barbara. Is any lobbying or meeting with any of these people who are making decisions appropriate for any of the town council or any of us to?
Yeah, I don't think so at this time. I think really getting through the hurdle of having the member of Congress basically support your project. As I said, there was nothing that we qualified for. I had consulted with Congressman Raskin's office. The biggest hurdle, I think, is just to get your senator to advance your project.
Right.
And I don't know that there's anything else that, unless you happen to know someone else on the Appropriations Committee that is, someone in the delegation. I can give you a list of them if any of you have any contacts, and you can see if there's anyone you know.
Sure.
Okay.
That would be helpful.
Just an update from the last meeting. We did receive a fully executed copy of the new memorandum of understanding between the town and the State Highway Administration for Strathmore Avenue. As a reminder, this governs certain maintenance activities for which we can now receive payment, limited, but some payment at least, as well as the right to prune trees along Strathmore. So that MOU was returned to me on May 16th. We were already in the process of getting pricing from Bartlett Tree Experts. We've been waiting almost 2 years, as some of you know, to be able to start that pruning effort. That did get underway on June 3rd. Basically, Bartlett was on site for several days last week. The remaining work that they have to do will require traffic control. So they have confirmed that they have lined up traffic control and they are scheduled to be back in Garrett Park on Friday, June 14th. Just to be on the safe side, I did email Bartlett earlier this evening, just asking them to confirm that they will be in town working on Friday. And if that is in fact the case, we will be sending out a notification on the listservs that anyone traveling on Strathmore may anticipate some short, but certainly some stoppages just due to the work being performed.
That's a good idea.
That was Gerald's idea. So I want to give credit where credit is
Good
due.
job, Gerald.
And lastly, just with our maintenance team, obviously this is one of their, pretty much their busiest time of year with mowing grass, weeding, mulching. shout out to our team because they did undertake planting flowers in the whiskey barrels and the planting beds, which certainly kind of spruces up the town and makes it really attractive. As some of you know, during the post-election bell ringing, things got a little vigorous, so the rope did come undone. So they did spend some time basically getting the rope reattached to the bell. It actually ended up being fortuitous that the rope became disengaged because when they were trying to figure out how to connect it again, they were up on the roof and basically noticed that there was a rather sizable section on the rear part of the building where the roof had actually pulled away from the flashing. So we had not had any water intrusion into the building. But like I say, it did turn out to be very kind of a lucky accident because they probably wouldn't have been up there otherwise. And then our town, when they have time, are continuing to remove invasives on town right of way, as well as other town properties, as requested by Phil Normandy. And lastly, I did just want to give a shout out to our maintenance supervisor, George Miller. He has been and continues to be very helpful with the town office renovation project. One of the things George has been working on is with what everyone refers to as Keating. We are having to basically put an annunciator there and tie that into the fire alarm system. So that's kind of one of the examples of the things that George does where he sort of sees that through with the fire alarm company and making sure that gets installed. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
How are we going about getting the roof repair done?
George reached out to a roof vendor we have used in the past. I'm not sure 100% of the status of that. I do believe they've been out. I don't know if the work has actually been completed.
Cool.
But Kayla can check with George and report out since I'll be out the rest of the week.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the town manager's report or the financials for the month of May? All right, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the execution of the lease for the Black Market Bistro.
Thank you, Mayor Keller. So on January 26th of 2004, the town executed a lease within the kitchen, which does business as Black Market. That lease commenced on the earlier of June 15th of 2004 when the restaurant opened for business. So the earlier of those two dates was June 15th of 2004. The initial lease only addressed the restaurant space on the second floor of the Penn Place building. The initial term of the lease was for 10 years, and the lease provided for 2 optional 5-year extension options. The lease amount was prescribed for the initial 10-year term and the first 5-year extension option, and then the second 5-year extension option was sort of open-ended, and the parties were to negotiate those rates. At some point, and I haven't been able to find out exactly when, the town agreed to lease a small space on the 3rd floor of the Penn Place building, which is used as a pantry. In addition to those rent for those 2 spaces, Black Market does pay a pro rata share of the operational cost for the building, which is a standard lease provision for any type of shared commercial space. That current share is 36.8%. The restaurant also has, under the current lease, non-exclusive use of the East Porch of Penn Place, which is not included in the square footage. So the lease that we have currently is scheduled to expire on June 15th. We've been in discussion now for several months for the framework in terms of a new lease. Couple things that we'd like to do in the new lease. One is to move the date from a mid-June date to actually the start of the town's fiscal year, or July 1. One of the things you likely noticed in the staff memo is we are seeking your concurrence to have Mayor Keller sign what is referred to as a letter extension, just to basically bridge us from June 15th through the end of the month. The other part, obviously, on tonight's agenda is basically going through the proposed terms of the new lease and also getting the town council's authorization for Mayor Keller to sign that lease. So as I mentioned, the commencement date of the new lease is proposed to be July 1st. This would basically align with our fiscal year and make certain calculations a lot easier. Black Market has requested an initial lease term of 5 years with 2 5-year extension options. As proposed, beginning in year 2 and through the first of the 5-year option periods, the annual lease amount would be increased by 3%. For the second option period, Black Market proposed, and we have agreed to, subject to your authorization, of course, that the lease amount and annual escalation rate would be market-based as agreed upon by the parties. In preparation for the lease negotiations, we did retain a firm to basically do an analysis of the Penn Place building based on what is referred to as BOMA standards. This is an accepted way of measuring space for commercial leases. The current lease basically contemplates, or actually is based on the physical square footage of the second floor space. What BOMA standards do is basically not just look at physical square footage, but basically a process where you calculate rentable square footage, which essentially sort of incorporates the fact that someone who is renting space has to utilize corridors. They are benefiting from certain mechanical spaces in the building. The reason I mention this is that that process has altered the rentable square footage. It would now be 2,900 rentable square feet, and that consists of the restaurant on the second floor, the third floor pantry. I also spoke to Ms. Black about at least including for some portion of the calendar year the square footage that is the patio. That is becoming much more common in terms of patios, rooftop decks, things of that nature. As I mentioned, the existing lease talks about the porch being non-exclusive use by the restaurant. There's no doubt now that it is used exclusively by them. There's actually a chain around it, which we actually obtained the historic area work permit for them for that to be installed. So this has basically upped the square footage, basically that Black Market would be paying for in terms of the front porch. Ms. Black and I believe it would be appropriate to have them pay rent for 8 months of the year. There are certain times during the year where that's just simply unusable, particularly since they can't use any type of heaters on that space. In terms of rentable square footage leasing rates, we also did some research on market rates for restaurants in the area. It is certainly a very unique restaurant space, as you all know. Its setting is in a residential area, so it is not comparable to something that's on Connecticut Avenue or the Pike. So it was somewhat challenging finding comparable market data. We obviously have a number of other residents in town who own restaurants, which is certainly a handy resource. Someone else, one of whom connected me with someone who basically is a restaurant consultant. We did not talk specifically about Black Market itself, but he has access to CoStar data, which some of you are familiar with, and was basically just to provide some reports and some insight into the market in this area, which was very helpful. Based on that data, it was clear that there was an adjustment in the leasing rates was warranted as of July 1st. So what Ms. Black and I have agreed to, subject to your authorization once again, is that the square footage rate for the front porch and for the main restaurant space would be $42.50 a rentable square foot. The pantry space is generally, in checking with some other folks, if it's not considered to be part of the main restaurant space, it usually leases for less. So the proposed rentable square footage rate for the third floor pantry would be $35 a rentable square foot. As I mentioned, the porch, we would only be collecting for 8 months of the year. Ms. Black and I also had some discussion about the apportionment of the building operating cost. Currently, the WSSC costs are rolled into the annual building cost. Anyone who can kind of look at who the tenants are in Penn Place would know that the restaurant probably is a much higher water user than the town office or the post office. There was a private meter installed in the Penn Place building, presumably around the time of the renovation, for reasons that aren't entirely clear. That private meter, to the best of my knowledge, has never been read. So what we have agreed upon in the new lease is that WSSC charges going forward would be based on the actual private meter reading of the restaurant space. The maintenance staff would basically take quarterly readings. They would take photos of both meters. Those would be given to Black Market as documentation, and then they would pay us directly for their actual water usage in the restaurant itself. The rest of the building expenses, basically would be calculated, and audited at the end of the fiscal year. You know, and basically if black market underpaid, because we're having to do estimates, then they would have a certain period of time to pay us the shortage. If for some reason they overpaid based on those initial estimates, then they would be issued a credit. With the addition of the porch included in the square footage, their pro rata share of the building expenses would go up from 36.8% to 40.85%. Included in your agenda packet is the information in terms of what black market pays us currently and what they would be paying us under the new lease. As noted in the staff memo, as I was kind of starting to work on the new lease, it became clear that somewhere along the way, there was a misunderstanding on the town's part of certain lease provisions in a number of areas, including when the actual lease commenced. And that was tied to the fact that black market got 3 months of free rent when they were first gearing up. That somehow got misinterpreted, I believe, at least by one of my predecessors, that the actual date when everything changed basically was further back in the year than it actually was. There also were indications that at least some of my predecessors used to notify black market when those amounts would change, whether that was the pro rata share of the building expenses or the actual lease amount. Probably due to staff turnover, which was also occurring around the time of the pandemic, perhaps other reasons that I don't fully understand. But basically black market has been paying the same amount since around October of 2017. It's not entirely clear from the files as to why the negotiation for the second year option period did not occur. Some of you who are more tenured on the council may have some insights that I don't actually have regarding that. When I basically found some of the issues with the administration of the lease, I did speak to the then mayor. And given the fact that the restaurant was coming out of the pandemic, by Maryland law, the statute of limitations for recovery, if there's an error such as this, is 3 years, which basically encompassed the pandemic period. I would note that black market continued to pay its full amount to the town throughout the pandemic, despite the fact they were shut down, at least for some period of time, and then had limited space out on the street. Ms. Black and I sat down at that time. We discussed the issues that had been found and let her know that we would be focusing on kind of right sizing the lease going forward rather than attempting to go back and recover. So that's sort of the lay of the land of what we're proposing. I did want to take this opportunity just to acknowledge and to publicly thank Barbara Black just for her professionalism throughout the negotiations, her openness and kind of willingness to consider the town's position. There could not have been a better person to be working with throughout this process, and I do want to thank her for that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, but
I have 2 questions.
sure.
One is Chris had mentioned about the shed where they keep the wood and whatever else. Do we want to add that to this lease, or is that your plan?
I think that's up to you all. I will say I was not having relatively limited tenure with the town of about 2.5 years. I did not have some of the history that obviously Mayor Keller does, and some of you may have had. I knew they had a shed. I was not aware that there was perhaps some sensitivity to the use of that space and tied to Porcupine Woods. So that was not part of the original.
Do you know if they paid for the shed and built the shed, or if the town did?
They paid for the shed.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
It's a question of whether the land space
Right.
should remain rent-free.
Right.
Right. At this juncture, so I initially brought that up when Mayor Keller apprised me of kind of the sensitivity of the matter. I had never brought it up with them because they were not paying at the time.
Right.
So I think that's still an open-ended issue. I left a phone message for Ms. Black today after talking to the mayor earlier this morning. They obviously have a business to run, a number of businesses to run, so I have not heard back from her. I let her know in the voicemail message I left for her that, we would like at least some nominal payment to recognize the fact that they're using town property. And I'm just waiting to hear back from her. I think it's certainly worth a discussion with her. I also just want to note that we've upped the square footage that they're paying on. We've upped the rates considerably. They're going to be paying a greater share of WSSC expenses, and now they're going to be paying a greater share of all other building expenses. So I think from a policy standpoint, I think you will have to weigh an understandable desire to have them pay for the town land that they are using. Certainly, I think many of us are aware that there are nonprofit entities in town who are looking for storage space. So I think it does become a bit challenging to give a for-profit entity free use of town land. So I'll leave that to you all to decide how to handle tonight. We do have obviously a fairly tight window. Certainly the letter agreement doesn't cut things off as of June 30th. It allows them to continue to operate while negotiations are ongoing. But I think it's in everybody's best interest to try to lock the lease down and have it start clean on July 1st if possible.
Thank you. My second question is, I was in the black market restaurant, maybe on a Saturday night, and I noticed that the receptionist was out in the hall where the artwork is, and there's a lot of people who use that space in those bathrooms, so I don't know how that's calculated in their rent.
Yeah, so the BOMA standards, and I will admit, George Miller and I have had to have a couple sessions with the company to make sure we were understanding it, so I certainly do not profess to be an expert. To some degree, rentable square footage incorporates a load factor on certain spaces in the building, including hallways. I will acknowledge I walked out of the building at the end of the workday a couple weeks ago and saw the host stand slightly into the second floor hallway and was a bit surprised. I've not seen that since then. I think that's probably something we need to talk to them about. We are required by building code standards to make sure that hallways have a certain amount of accessibility, not only for those of us who are fortunate enough to be able-bodied, but for people who have mobility challenges. So George Miller and I have just been sort of kicking around some thoughts about the number of chairs that should be out there. They're not really to be serving anyone. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I only saw it one brief time. And
I've only seen it once too, but I go over there all.
Yeah, I think it's certainly worth talking about. So like I say, the hallways are intended to be just that, hallways for the most part, recognizing that if someone is, waiting for their reservation to be seated, there may be people who need to, actually sit down.
Right.
So I think that's just something that we need to discuss with them.
Okay, thank you.
When you look at that, could you look at whether there's a fire code issue?
Yeah, that's actually something that we're talking about, is just making sure we have an understanding of how wide everything has to be maintained. Typically, it does factor in, no obstruction. So in the event of a fire, someone can easily get out, but also someone with mobility challenges, that they're not hindered.
I would just observe that those last couple of questions go to what I might term more operational issues. For purposes of our discussion tonight, talking about the lease, I'm quite confident that the staff, which has done a superb job in all aspects of this, has also given a lot of attention to the appropriate formulas for the common areas. It's what we're talking about when we talk about the halls and so on. Overall, the staff has done a really splendid job, I think, pulling together a very business-like lease, and in particular, capturing areas which had been overlooked in earlier leases, and maintaining a really excellent relationship with the tenant. For purposes of going forward, I'm going to bifurcate this, however. The first thing we need to do is have just a letter agreement for the remaining 20 some odd days of this month to permit us to finalize the lease, all of the major portions of which have already been discussed between Barbara Matthews and Barbara Black. So I will entertain a motion to authorize execution of a letter agreement to extend the existing lease with Black Market from June 15, 2024 to June 30, 2024.
So moved.
Second,
Okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
Now let's move to the question of authorizing the mayor to execute a new lease with an effective date of July 1st, 2024. In accordance with the terms described in the memo and just summarized by the town manager. I will entertain such a motion.
So moved.
Second,
I'll second.
discussion?
I guess the only caveat would be to just finish up the issue about the shed. And are we gonna charge them for it? How much are we gonna charge them for it? Are we gonna add that or not? So I think you need to finalize that negotiation.
And I guess just one other question. I mean, the rent is going up about 50% over the year 13 of the lease, I guess, which was October 2017. You explained that somewhat, but now it's only going to go up 3% for the first several years, and then it goes up a market amount. Why only 3% the first 2 years?
So let me comment to the existing lease, it's not really the original lease, actually went up about 2% the first couple years. I'd have to actually pull the lease up, and then it went to 3%. I checked with, I mentioned that I had touched base with a restaurant consultant in terms of what is the most common, escalation clause that they will see just based on inflation, as well as someone who owns a number of commercial office buildings in Kensington. Both of them said that 3% was the most common standard.
Thanks.
And I would just observe that the request to add the space on which the shed sits to the lease is just the notion that each of the spaces they use should not be rent-free.
Correct.
The actual amount can be a relatively small amount. I don't think we're having any difficulty over that.
$200 a month, I think is what you said.
It honestly just needs to be in there
Okay,
so that we don't have the precedent of allowing rent-free use
right,
of town-owned property.
right.
And agree, just to get it into writing, so it's recognized there, even if it's a nominal amount, makes sense.
Exactly. Is there any further discussion? Anything from the residents? Very well, I'll call for the question. All in favor of authorizing me to execute a new lease between the town and the kitchen doing business as Black Market Bistro with an effective date of July 1st, 2024, in accordance with the terms described in the town manager's memo and oral description this evening, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Otherwise minded? Very good, thank you. Gate at the end of Kenilworth Avenue. Councilman Eisenstein.
Okay, thank you. So just to quickly narrate the origins of the survey. The survey resulted from a discussion brought to us by residents early this year. And after, I think in the conclusion of that discussion, I was left not knowing more broadly how to think about this question because I live on Keswick, which made me a good, honest broker for this question, I think, right? Far away from the issue. But having heard about school bus diversions or difficulties in executing service for, in particular, kids with special needs and others, it seemed important to follow up on a pledge to get more information through the survey, and Kayla kindly agreed to do it. We were unable to do it during the budget season. There was other business to attend to, but we remembered to do it soon thereafter. It is in no way intended to be a scientific survey. I do scientific surveys for a living as a researcher. this was just intended to be a way to get a sense more broadly of what, I mean, from my standpoint, and that hopefully from other members of the council, the question would be, you know, how, as it always is in Garrett Park, there's always, you know, divergent views, but the question is, how imperative is it to solve a certain problem for a small group of people at the expense of the perhaps broader sentiment, which was conveyed as being favorable to leaving the gate as it is, but how many exceptions were there? It seems to have been conveyed in the survey. If, as we expect, people each filled out one survey, which we hope they did, and would be reasonable to expect from them. If they did that, then there are several people who live in the immediate area who are seemingly inconvenienced at least by this, you know, the gate being closed. And so I wanted, you know, for us to report back, have a discussion, and I had planned to make to formally propose to consider opening the gate so that we could have more discussion and see in the next meeting through a vote how to resolve this. If it turns out to be true that the people with the immediate and most urgent issues are now less convinced about the urgency of this, as was reported secondhand, then maybe we wouldn't need to do that, right? Maybe we don't need to have to have a proposal to formally open the gate. So I am willing to just to engage with my colleagues. I would be inclined to go forward with that proposal so that we can get information and have a more decisive discussion next time, because I think we want to, at the very least, make decisions. And unless the decision is to, you know, perhaps not even discuss this further. So I guess I open this to the colleagues.
All right, let me just observe that you assisted in the development and dissemination of the survey by Kayla, and I'm wondering, Kayla, do you have anything to add?
I will keep it short and sweet so that council can have the lion's share of time. This was disseminated on the listserv as well as being posted as a news article on the homepage of the website. We were aiming for visibility to Garrett Park residents in particular. My apologies to residents who are concerned that we did not fully capture that. That will be feedback we incorporate into future surveys. The other thing I do want to point out in the broader open-ended comment responses, council, you have them in your packet. There was a mention of a minor's name that was not caught by staff before the memo went out. We were alerted to this name being included over the weekend, and we have since updated the memo that is present on the website to redact that name. So we do want to apologize to the family for failing to catch that in the initial posting. And we do want to make sure that council is aware that that has since been corrected. But otherwise, the floor is council's.
Kayla, may I ask you, did you take any measures to ensure that each household could only answer the survey per resident, or were there any protective measures of that nature?
So if I wanted to, I could go back and pull the IP addresses, which, as Donna touched on earlier, isn't 100% a guarantee. Rather than locking it to one response per household, because for those of you who have lived with other individuals, you can love them and disagree with them. And we wanted to make sure that we were capturing the full extent of residents' thoughts, even if their nearest and dearest at home had a very different interpretation. So this was meant to be a broad, general pulse feeling what's happening in this section of town that council may not frequently see. As previously noted, there are a number of respondents who indicated that they aren't living in super close proximity or that they don't perceive any issue, even though they do live within a broad or narrow area.
So from a technical point of view, I would say I'm against just speaking on a technical point of view, against opening the gate, and one of the reasons is because it's not a road on the other side. It's a collection of dirt and gravel and other miscellaneous material. I don't know how well that stuff would hold up. I don't know whether it's gonna be good or bad for cars. I don't know. Even if we're gonna do something one way or the other, we would need to do some investigation to find out how we're gonna bring it up to a road standard that people would expect and would be safe for those traveling it, because we certainly wouldn't want to incur a whole bunch of potholes or other issues because of that. So just speaking solely from a technical point of view, I think it may not be a great idea just to leave the gate open for a period of time. The second thing is, if there's a suggestion that if it's not done, is that we put a dead end sign. I don't believe there is one at the end, at the far end, but we put a dead end sign up there. It helps the people who read it. Of course, people don't read a lot of signs these days, but that may also.
Yeah, there's currently a sign at Clyde that says for traffic going further on Kenilworth, that it's a dead end, and I believe it gives the street address of the last house.
Yes, and I've seen that and I agree, except it's a bit vague because it says something to the effect of the last address on the street is whatever it is. I don't know what it is. Right, and so I think something a little more clear to say dead end or no outlet, no outlet. But I know it does, on the same sign, right? It's just that people may not read it because all they read is just the one sign. But anyway.
I have some different thoughts from a technical perspective. I've worked in my third decade working as an architect. I'm also trained as an urban designer. I have a master's in urban planning, extensive experience in historic preservation. So I'm also like a huge fan of the original town plan for this town. I think it's like a lot of other issues in Garrett Park. I think if I was sat around a table of a dozen other practitioners in all those kind of fields, I don't think there would be much of any swell, if any, saying to put a gate at that kind of a location. It just doesn't make sense from the historic perspective. That was originally a street corner that you would be able to wrap around Rokeby to Kenilworth. I think there was also argued that you've would be pushing people around, having to do a turnaround at the end of Kenilworth, but you had to do that at the end of, or at the end of Rokeby, you had to do that at Kenilworth, either on the north side of the gate or the south side of the gate. So you have to do a U-turn no matter which way you do it, but it would be a lot more relieved if you could just loop around. And I still don't understand the argument about safety too. It's not as if people go out and walk around loops on just that block. When I walk over that way a couple times a month, maybe I go down Rokeby and I come around and come back up Kenilworth or vice versa. So I think I didn't really notice much difference in like a safety factor one way or the other. I feel like they're the same. It's also been argued that the street is too narrow, but it's actually 1 foot wider than Rokeby is, where all the traffic is diverted. So I don't know, it's like
stations away and made it.
yeah, if you took the stanchions away, I mean, Jack Mandel had reported before that Kenilworth is 19 foot wide, but I've measured Rokeby when there were some similarly strange arguments made during safe routes to schools that about street widths on Kenilworth further up, but it's really just 18 feet where it necks around a tulip poplar. So I just don't understand why make one street a dead end and divert all that traffic elsewhere. I just feel like it's a lot of arguments I've heard in Garrett Park that just don't really hold a lot of water, in my opinion. So when I appreciate, folks that want to keep the gate because they're used to it, but I feel like that's usually the biggest argument in town is it's been this way, we're used to it, don't change anything, and kind of a lot of arguments get thrown against the wall, but I feel like a lot of them don't stick either on this one or the Argyle intersection or safe routes to school. So I have a feeling I'll probably be the minority opinion on it, but I just feel like this town does that a lot. I feel like the town damages itself with that kind of don't change anything attitude, don't ever improve anything.
So I guess the question may be whether there are partial solutions not tried before, such as maybe an additional dead sign a block earlier that, you know, might be helpful, or if there's other ways we can address, I mean, to me, the problem is the access for, you know, school buses, right? I mean, that's the,
And that one bothered me a little bit too, because like, somebody came here and talked about a special needs child. I mean, to me, as somebody, again, in my third year of practicing in all those fields, that's an Americans with Disabilities Act violation. We would just never consider that, but I just feel like it's strange how people just walk past that in this town. I just don't, I've just gotten used to it, I think, here, so. And I don't really, have as much concern perhaps as you do, Phil, about the other side of that. I know purposely when Rokeby was repaved maybe 5-ish years ago, the then mayor, she wanted to make sure that that street wasn't paved in that area by the gate because she never wanted that gate open. It really would not have been that hard to repave it then or now. It's really not. I mean, it has some subgrade on it. It wouldn't be a 6-figure thing, but it's the usual kind of spaghetti gets thrown on the wall. So
I think that does raise a question. Do we have information about approximately what year that street, Kenilworth, would be, that section of Kenilworth would be on the road rehabilitation schedule?
I don't have the road rehabilitation schedule at hand, Barb. I don't know if that's a document you have access, so if council could give us a few seconds for Barb to check.
I mean, I do think it's relevant that we couldn't just open the gate at this point, even if we wanted to, because it's not really travel worthy.
yeah, it's not ready.
The road, so that's one issue. We may also want to consider this as we do the planning for Yandell Park and think about the surrounding area as the plan for the park takes shape. Just give it some time to percolate instead of trying to rush to a decision now.
The population point, I think that's something I thought about too. It's kind of a low spot where a lot of stormwater comes down that area and the park's going to be redone. I know it was talked before about the idea of using the old driveway as a turnaround, which I feel is like a workaround for not easing traffic around the corner there. But I think there's a lot of other ways to limit and slow traffic, and that plus like some stormwater retention and potentially in the town right away at that low spot could be a good combination project for the future with repaving that to be able to handle cars and trucks with whatever goes through there. And it could be a good low traffic area of town to do a pilot to kind of see if there are other ways. And Dick Pratt and I talked for a couple times about further up on Kenilworth and safe routes to schools about whether to do a chicane or do something else, like some other sort of necking down where it goes to like a 1 lane. That's a pretty common practice in a lot of other areas too. Slow traffic down and make sure people are really thinking about what they're doing, and then you can have walk past go around it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity down there versus, just jumping to open the gate or keeping it shut. So
There's one last point. We were talking about whether there were interim temporary measures we could take to improve the situation there. And I wonder if the town reaching out to the school system, because as I understood it, the regular day-to-day pickup and delivery by the school bus works okay. It's when there's a substitute driver that there is an issue. So perhaps the town could, on behalf of residents, reach out to the school system in the interim and emphasize the importance of education for substitute drivers, maybe placard messaging inside the bus about the route or something, because I'm assuming they use the same bus each time. My kid's bus is numbered, and it's the same bus. Generally, it's usually the same route. So perhaps there's some things like that we could do in the meantime.
In answer to the question that was posed, according to the capital improvement program, as road conditions stand today, Rokeby is scheduled to be paved in fiscal year 29.
I guess it's really more Kenilworth. The Kenilworth spur is the one that's
Yeah.
more appropriate because that's really where it is. Yeah.
I suppose you could pick it up.
Yeah, but even if, I don't think that's even vital because that could always be put onto a part of a larger project to do 60 feet or whatever it is, or 100
certainly
feet.
could be, yes.
I
It
I
looks
will
like-
say that portion of Kenilworth on this, the south side of the gate was rebuilt 16 years ago, give or take. And it was rebuilt, not just repaved, because the pavement had been put down not in the center of the right of way, but far to one side, such that about 18 inches of the road was actually on Mr. McCool's property. So we had to move. There were no curbs. We had to install the curbs at the farthest extent of the town's right of way, or nearest extent, meaning that the town's right of way on the other side of the street extends about 30 feet into what appears to be people's front yards. I don't know what challenges would be posed by meshing the short portion of Kenilworth that would need to be paved beyond the gate with that portion which is currently paved and otherwise improved with curbs and gutters. But I think it might be an issue. Whether it be a six-figure issue or not, I don't know.
Are you saying to fix where the street's up against the right of way, like what? I'm not
I
sure.
don't know. I don't know what the width of the street is and so ended up being. I think we were attempting to make it up to standard.
Yeah, resident had measured it as 19, but I think the reason I've looked at the map in that area, the reason why it's held to the east side of the street is because that's a little bit unusual section of town. Most of town was planned with lots. They're plus or minus 200 feet. But on that western side of Kenilworth, there's two things actually to it. The narrows got, or the streets, the lots rather got a lot less deep on that side. A lot of them are like 100 feet-ish. So we're feeling it was probably something where that street was held over a little bit because those lots on the west side were already a little bit smaller. And then the other thing is just from a historic standpoint, I think there was only one lot past Clyde on Kenilworth on the left. That's why partly why a lot of those lots are shallower compared to most of the town is that whole area from that one house past Clyde all the way down to the tip of town. That was all originally meant to be a park. It wasn't originally meant to be lots, and they were later changed. If folks changed their mind in the early 1950s, there was a big subdivision plot that changed the intersection and everything else there. So I think it was probably just a pretty rough path down that way. But then when all that was redone, there was probably something where the street was kind of rejiggered to make those lots feel a little bit less shallow on one side and kind of just work it still, probably attempting to stay in the right of way. But it actually even changed the intersection because the original plan had the intersection of Kenilworth. Actually, Kenilworth Avenue was going to go straight, and then I think it was suggested it would go across the railroad tracks there, which I don't think is even physically possible. But Rokeby was going to dead end to it, and that was the park. Was everything kind of west of that intersection, like all of that, the end of Rokeby. It's changed, but that's been what 70 years now, so it's pretty cemented in.
Kenilworth Avenue, that part of Kenilworth is scheduled for paving in fiscal year 30 currently.
Just to say, I think I'm not going to make a motion tonight to formally consider opening the gate. I think what I would like to do myself in thinking about if I lived in that area and I had children, how much, who had needs that were not being met, how big of a problem would this be? I think our survey got us a good sense that opinion is mixed, but I think I want to go try and talk to families over there who are directly impacted, who came to the last meeting when we discussed this. But if there are changes, which I will ask.
Just to be clear, I was not implying that
People have changed.
People's names, but Carrie was saying this is not an issue. What I was saying is that we clarified. Sorry, that we clarified. I was just trying to understand this because given that they are two houses beyond the T we're talking about.
Okay.
If the bus went to their house, it would have to, by definition, back up. And so she said, oh yeah, we're never gonna get door-to-door service because they're not gonna do that.
Okay,
So it was more, that's what I was trying to clarify, that they were trying to simply see if creating a loop situation versus a backup situation was possible. Is that
Okay,
yes, a backup
yes.
into the current gate area
okay,
to turn around,
all right,
just
so.
to make sure.
So the issue is still there, and I guess the question is, how do we consider this in conjunction with other plans for that area going forward? At least that's my view of it. I don't know. I was planning to introduce a motion. I think it's very complicated. I think I'm gonna wait for now unless someone else wants to do that.
Right. And at least what I heard here is that we could talk to MCPS and also approach various mapping services. GPS.
I will do MCPS as the liaison.
All right. For other intents and purposes, we're just holding it in advance. All right. The next item on the agenda is the proposed reconfiguration of Kenilworth Avenue and Argyle. At the last meeting, the council voted 4-1 to not proceed with the proposed plans that were part of the larger streets, roads and sidewalks contract that had been approved at the May 13 meeting. Subject to obtaining an elevation view of the driveway proposed as part of.
Like your driveway,
I'm sorry, yes.
yeah,
And further examination of the issue, but primarily the driveway. At that same meeting, that is May 28, we also agreed to go ahead with the removal of the bamboo. The staff has arranged that with Empire. Empire seems to be overextended at the moment. They've stopped work in Mandel Park, but when they return, we will remove the bamboo from the hatched area shown on the plan. That element we all agreed would be central to any approach to improving safety at this intersection. Subsequently, Councilmember Schultz and I met with the town's consulting engineer, Jason of Clark Azar, and a representative of Goro Slade, the consulting traffic engineers, by Zoom. We still have no elevation as such for the driveway, and there was considerable discussion of the configuration of the driveway, how it would behave in various stormwater scenarios and so on. I think with that, I will turn to Councilmember Schultz and ask if you have anything to add.
So we did discuss it. I asked a number of questions regarding this. Basically, what they said was that they weren't going to redraw the drawings as they were submitted for the bid, that there's sufficient information there for the contractor to do the work in such a way that the water would not come back into the driveway. Specifically, what they said was there'd be a 6-inch difference between the plane of the street where the street meets the driveway and then up to the top of the driveway apron. That would mean then that the water would have to get over 6 inches deep to be able to get there. For those people who happen to wander by my house periodically, you will see the exact same setup in my house that goes up on one side and down on the other. Always worked fine for me. 6-inch differential I always thought was fine. I was going to sketch something out, but unfortunately I didn't have time, and I wasn't sure if it was even worth it because I didn't know if we wanted to reopen the subject or not. In addition, we discussed getting in and out of the driveway. And so one of the things specifically was, will the Tesla be able to clear this new, shall we call it, peak? And I explained that at least I've got 2 Toyotas and we have never had a problem, knock on wood. They did a quick analysis down there and said, yes, there would be 2 inches of clearance from the bottom, it said Tesla to the driveway. In addition, they had sized the curve such that it would accommodate a full-size Chevy Suburban, which is like 20 feet long plus. So the biggest thing would be that the homeowner, Ed, would have to learn how to back his car up a little bit differently than he does now. However, there was sufficient amount of room to be able to accommodate the Tesla or a Suburban as far as turning radius goes. And they agreed that if it turned out that the slope, which is going to be a maximum of 8%, that's what's allowed in the rules. If it turned out to be longer than what's considered, what you see here is the limit of disturbance, or LOD, they would actually extend our LOD slightly in order to ensure that we got an 8-degree slope back towards the house. They also haven't changed the fact that there's they call it an inlet, but it's really an outlet, or bubbler, some people call it. But that's something else that could be done. We also discussed the bump out, and the way the bump out is now. I had suggested that maybe it go longer, because when I originally kind of had an idea on this, my thought was that we continue Argyle, the curb, if you will, which there's not really much of a curb left, it would go straight. And they had said it was probably better to do what we've got here, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem because people will see it far enough in advance.
And that would slow the traffic down on Argyle.
Yes, it would, coming up the hill.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing with this whole curve that we see now, the green space, if you will, the little dots on our drawing, is that it's going to basically keep people from cutting the corner, because anybody who walks by that area will notice that the corner is kind of trashed, where multiple car tires have cut the corner. Now, we haven't seen a lot of it. I didn't see much in the short time I was there, but I did see one car cut that corner for sure. And you can definitely see the evidence, but the idea would.
So cut the corner, traffic coming westbound on Argyle turning right or north on Kenilworth.
That is correct.
And do we have a notion of the proportion of traffic that makes that turn versus the left turn?
Sorry, but no idea. We never really did a survey. I can look now, actually, I take that back. And it was in slide. It was a Google slide. So I'd have to go look it up, and I don't have it.
I remember it being more than that. It's not a lot, but I remember it being more than I would have guessed. Most people make a left there.
Didn't we talk about adding some striping along, I mean, if we remove the bamboo along Kenilworth in the right of way, and then do some additional striping in and around that corner to get people to slow down and to maybe not cut the corner to try to slow the traffic down. I thought that was part of our discussion. Was to add
Last year?
striping, yeah, last week,
I think
our last meeting.
I remember.
Do some things that were less costly and involved than doing this construction.
The vote was to continue to omit this portion of that omnibus streets, roads, and sidewalks contract. There's no specific determination of what will be done.
About doing some striping and a sign and
There was discussion of that. There was no determination of what to actually do in lieu of
this, right?
This construction.
Yes.
But we talked about exploring possibilities.
Yeah.
Right? Which.
Talked about it. One idea somebody had come up with was that it was Todd Del Prairie, for those of you who haven't seen it, was that we put a stop line and then we put a stop sign. That one of the questions I had is that okay based on Maryland rules and laws? And that's something I'm going to have to ask Jason about.
You put the stop sign in the street or put the stop sign down the hill?
Put the stop sign would be slightly down the hill and off to the side, and I've never seen that happen before. Usually the stop signs are quite right in line with the stop line. It's meant to be that way.
I can't remember if it was Clark Azar or Grove Slade or both that said that and that's normal practice. I'm used to that from my practice, that the stop sign is always as close as you can get to where you want people to stop. You don't kind of make a suggestion, feedback.
That's
You
uncomfortable.
can't put it in the street either, but I guess overall, I mean, this is just a pretty standard, simple plan. It's not much different than a lot of other intersections in town. If anything, from an urban design standpoint, usually for traffic calming, you call for a really tight radius where the corner is, where you want to really make people slow down and be careful going around the corner. And this is actually a standard radius of 10 feet, like 10 to 15 is kind of normal. When you're trying to shut that down, a lot of newer developments will make it 2.5 or even 5 feet at the max. So, I mean, this is not, this is taking something that's a really unusually wide sweep, and then turning it into like a pretty normal intersection. And I think if everyone here is like kind of alarmed by the bump out where the outlet is, like if you just put your thumb over that, or even draw like a straight line, it's really that bump out curve. It's not really a bump out, it's just continuing the same straight line from Argyle. It's just kind of setting it but allowing a scoop for the inlet, so or the outlet rather. So
Right.
Okay,
this is a very straightforward plan.
let's get this discussion off dead center.
Mhm.
Question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so what are our options here? Are we talking about a design that still could be added to the existing contract? Or are we talking about a design to put on a future contract? What's that? That part's not clear to me right now.
If you would talk with the contractor, they'd be willing to do something, but not having witness to that, I'm gonna let you comment.
Yeah, not knowing where tonight's discussion was going, I did reach out to, I'm gonna get their initials wrong, SFMS Construction. They obviously know that the original notice of award indicated that we would give them direction within 3 weeks, which would have been June 5th. I did just ask them that, if there was a desire to do some type of work there, not involving bamboo, since we're contracting directly with Empire, would they be open to giving the town more time to make a decision? And their response was sure, within writing, sure, no problem. Obviously, I think that window somewhat depends on when they start laying out their construction schedule. There will be a point of no return where it would be difficult. At a minimum, since we would be removing the bamboo portion, this would be a change order work at this point, no matter what we do. So there certainly could be an opportunity to alter something if that's what you also choose.
So if you wish to reinstate it as drawn and proposed, I need a motion to reconsider, and it needs to come from one of the people who voted against last time. Typically, a motion to reconsider needs to be made at the same meeting in which the vote is taken, but we'll just treat it as a reconsideration rather than new business. Is there such a motion? All
Did we
right,
make it, I just want to ask one more question. So did we make a request to the engineering firm to provide the elevation? Is there an expected delivery date of that? We have a verbal, we just don't have.
Said that the information provided on the existing drawing was sufficient for the contractor to be able to make the driveway in the way that we wanted it with the proper elevations. And they said that also the town of Garrett Park would have a chance to inspect the forms, verify that things were correct prior to them actually pouring the concrete. So I would think that it was probably a good idea just to go ahead and go forward with it, but I'm.
well,
Make
you
a
so last time, so you can move to
I'll reconsider. Let's go do that.
was there a second?
Again, just a motion to reinstate the full contract, including the piece that we at least temporarily removed
Well,
last
the
week.
rest of the contract is on its way.
Correct.
This is just this one piece, which would need to be minor renegotiation because we have separately contracted removal of the bamboo.
Okay.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Very well. It's been moved and seconded to reconsider the council's decision last time to omit this portion of the construction from the omnibus streets, roads and sidewalks contract that was approved on May 13th. Is there further discussion?
I
I'd
would,
like to make a motion to,
Well, we can move to an end.
okay. What are we doing?
You would have to say what you moved to amend.
Yeah, I would move to amend that after the bamboo is removed, that we speak to someone about restriping and re-signing this intersection without doing this physical work of reconfiguring the intersection. And then we can look at how the traffic is and how the neighbors feel about it, and then make a decision whether we need to go forward with this expense or not.
So that would be a vote against reconsideration.
Correct.
So that's not a friendly amendment, so I guess. Right?
It's an alternative to this vote. It's another way to go down this.
So we
road.
need to vote on that
Yes.
first and then go back to, yeah.
I guess so.
Now, if the motion to reconsider fails, then she can say, okay, instead of, we should
Okay.
do this.
Okay.
If the motion to reconsider carries, then we ask Barb to add this back into the contract.
Okay,
I think,
if it fails, you're going to make this proposed
Correct.
amendment, okay.
and I,
I'll just say my vote before, at the May 28th meeting was based on the lack of clarity from the engineer. I feel like we've been provided that clarity, and so I feel comfortable seconding Phil's motion to reconsider.
and that's the reason I wanted to get the information, but after having a meeting with the town's engineer, I personally got the information, as Chris and Barbara were too, but that there is sufficient allowance to prevent all but a biblical flood from causing water to get into a resident's driveway.
And into their house.
Yeah.
So, Phil, you're more certain at the meeting, it sounds like, than necessarily in the, we had some notes before the meeting where I think both of you conveyed several doubts.
Right, my doubts have been taken care of, they've been addressed after the meeting with the town's engineer and the discussion with Jason Lai, our town's engineer. I am convinced that it should work.
I remain skeptical, but I do not have a vote. I think we can do a lot better at that intersection.
Yeah.
By taking advantage of the fact that structure that they identify as an inlet is in fact an outlet. We can handle not only the stormwater that comes off the road in this new bump out, but the stormwater that's carried under the road to that outlet. With a far more elegant solution that happens to be now rather commonplace, which is a stormwater retention and bioretention.
And that would be an additional amount of work and contract, not part of this.
That's correct. It would
Yeah.
be, you'd keep to your vote of last time of not adding this back in, and we would examine that separately. We could engage in some interim measures of the type that you've suggested, or Todd Del Priore has suggested, or some combination. And those of us who are going to Ocean City can go in the exhibit hall and look at all the exhibitors who have quite interesting displays about bioretention facilities.
But nothing would preclude if we did this the way in which it's shown, putting a bioretention facility, shall we say, downstream of this bump out, right? No.
The short answer is I don't know. I think
No.
it would be better to do it in one step, which would also permit a smoother line for the Argyle curve on that side. And you wouldn't have a bump out at all. You'd just have an extension because it would widen gradually to that point.
Again, you don't really have a bump out, you really have an indentation in, and it may be possible for them to just extend that outlet out so that it comes out into the curb, but just two comments about the potential for bioretention. I learned from doing it on a hilltop over in Kensington that it's very, very difficult if not close to impossible to do it on a steep downslope. And at the minimum, you'd have to take out all the trees that are between the right of way and the property line at that spot to kind of dig down, replace all the soil and everything else. And you most likely would have a pretty high dam or weir on the far end of it. It wouldn't be the same as if it was a down in a hollow at the bottom of a slope. I think far more likely if there was a desire to do something instead of an outlet going out into the curb, is it would be piped at whatever is piped underneath the kennelworth that comes out. That outlet would instead have to be like piped either down next to Argyle or in it, or under it rather, to get down to the stream by Wells Park. I just don't know if you can realistically do the kind of briar retention in that area without it being so big that it looks out of scale and couldn't even handle that much water anyway.
Was this option at all discussed in the meeting with the engineers?
I'm sorry?
Was this option discussed in the meeting with the engineers at all? Potential?
I think just a separate, totally separate comment, if I may, is I would suggest if it does get decided to move forward on it, I would ask if the engineer, if as a sketch process during construction, if they couldn't widen up the scoop at the end, because it is kind of a tight turn there. And even though technically you can make it work with a lot of cars, I think they could do something where instead of being like the minimum width for a driveway apron, maybe that's 1 1/3 or 1 1/2 that times that width, and then the inner radius of that driveway extension could be flattened out a little bit. That way you can kind of have a lot more room to find your way in and out.
So
I think they
maybe
could do that.
Entrance to the driveway.
I'm just saying, just like you would widen it, kind of
Yeah.
like this, so then this radius is a lot shorter, and it might be, instead of being a whatever that is, 9 feet, 10 feet, it could be like 12 feet.
I think the Goro slope engineer suggested something to that effect.
Yes.
Becomes difficult because of the existing trees.
Right. I'm pretty sure, but it should be checked.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that 10-inch tree there is a junker.
It is. It is a junker. It's the 15 that we gotta keep.
Yeah, so I think you could still do that and kind of be careful with the 15, and the 10 probably should come out anyway.
Is there further discussion? Call the question. All in favor of reconsideration of the council's vote at the May 28th meeting on this issue, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 4-2, it passes. We reinstate this provision of the contract with SFMS or whatever that acronym is. All right,
Could we ask them to look at that radius, or is that already would happen? I guess.
my understanding is you've just adopted it as presented.
I think that's the danger of this town, is we do a lot of this kind of weird rule following, and it's really doesn't happen in the real world. So we make changes like this
In the field.
daily. This kind of stuff.
If I might.
Exactly.
Put it this way, I have no objections.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scope of work is going to obviously be altered than what was in the bid documents anyway, because the bamboo work is no longer being done by them.
Mhm.
So if there's something you want them to look at, the scope is already being changed, I guess is my point, from what was in the contract because of the bamboo part.
Yes, perhaps ask about that question with the radius and the 10-inch tree too. If Phil Normandy's look, if nobody else minds. I feel like it's just, sorry, but I just feel like I've been on the council, I guess this 7, 8 years, but I've witnessed a lot of things where it's almost like has to be like codified somewhere, or has to be like a rule, and we just kind of look past common sense and doing the best long-term for the town with the idea that it has to be.
Person, I feel that with far too many so-called field adjustments done in recent construction projects here with absolutely no notice. I believe that residents are entitled to know what we're voting on. We're voting on a plan submitted by the town's consulting engineer. Not some vague notion that will go out and adjust on the spot at the site.
Well, I appreciate that because as you know, I'm very sympathetic to the same issue, but
I can resolve that.
yeah.
The vote has been taken. We've added it back into the contract. End of discussion. Unless someone wants to move to reconsider, and this time it'll be by Roberts because it's the same meeting.
Mhm.
All right, good. Town council summer meeting hiatus. I think we can dispense with this rather quickly. Is there a sense of the council that we should admit the regular August town council meeting? All in favor?
Aye.
I think that's all we need on that. Town Code Section 712, parking and access driveway facilities. Town Manager Matthews has given us an admirably complete memo, complete with lots of legislative history. Do you want to summarize that? Paul?
Sure, I can do that very quickly. So this item was requested by Jerry Lee at the town council meeting on April 8th. As the mayor indicated, the staff memo does include the actual language from section 712. In researching this matter, this ordinance obviously goes back quite a few years. So I pulled some of the meeting minutes. I think what's probably important to note is that the focus of this legislation when it was enacted was to encourage residents to construct off-street parking facilities. While that may have been the intent of the legislation, there is nothing in there that actually requires that someone is basically constructing a new driveway facility in order to be reimbursed. I will say, which doesn't make it right or wrong, just by happenstance, I've never seen a provision like this before in my career, so I thought it was very interesting when I got here to learn of it. I did check with some of the other small towns in the southern part of the county to see if they did anything similar. They do not. So the one key question I just wanted to note to just make sure this was on the record. So back in 2023, we were in the process of processing a request for reimbursement for construction of a driveway apron according to the provisions of this section. The town archivist undertook some research because I, on my own, was not initially finding anything that indicated that the reimbursement rate had been established by the town council. The town archivist was unable to find anything at that time that indicated that a rate had been set. I had also checked with our longtime accountant. Our accounting records go back electronically to 2007 to see if we had ever reimbursed somebody for construction of a driveway apron, and if so, what had we paid them? And there was no information that we had ever utilized this provision. We had a request in front of us and a resident who was awaiting reimbursement. So in the absence of any guidance in the town records that we were able to find at that time, I reached out to our civil engineering firm, Clark Azar, and said, what do you recommend? Because we needed to process the reimbursement. I also had another request that had come in right around the same time. Basically, they recommended that we look to the County Department of Permitting Services. At the county, they require bonds to be posted. And they actually have a bond calculator for different types of work. In talking this issue through with Mr. Azar, the cost associated with a standard residential driveway apron, according to the DPS calculator, is $2,300. That assumes that there's installation of a culvert pipe, which has an estimated value of $2,300. So that was sort of backed off unless someone was actually installing a culvert pipe. So that arrived at $1,900. Generally, when you're doing a driveway apron, you're also basically doing something to your driveway. So we did factor in basically the DPS calculator amount tied to a driveway removal. That methodology, rightly or wrongly, yielded a reimbursement rate of $2,900. And looking back historically, at what the town, has paid for replacement of driveway aprons as part of sidewalk projects, which we have done on a number of occasions, including a project during my tenure and including the upcoming project with SFMS. We have historically paid, right around $2,900, $3,000 when the town itself has paid for a driveway apron to be replaced in conjunction with the sidewalk project.
Can I ask a quick question? Are your driveway aprons concrete or asphalt?
We require driveway aprons now to meet county standards, which means they are concrete and they're 7 inches in depth.
Okay.
Do you know if other municipalities have these policies or are we the only ones?
You're I will say, this is the second state I've worked in, so I've been at this now for 38 years. I've never come across it. And the other towns do not. I would say it's fairly commonplace when you're doing sidewalk, either new construction of a sidewalk or you're doing replacement, because you're going to basically be ripping up everything, kind of crossing someone's property. So it is very common to actually replace driveway aprons as part of a sidewalk project.
But these are outside of a sidewalk project.
Yeah,
And we're the only community that actually pays people to replace these aprons outside of municipality sponsored construction jobs.
Yes, and I think some of that also, I wouldn't say we're the only ones, but I would say in part because the town streets are so narrow and trying to encourage people to construct driveway facilities to keep cars off the street. So I think there is an underlying policy objective. I think when the legislation was actually written, there's no requirement though that those two events be tied together. We processed two $2,900 payments during my time with the town, all within like the last 12 months. And neither of those parties, I don't want to get into the specifics, but neither of those parties were constructing new driveway facilities. In one case, they applied for a driveway permit. As I mentioned, the policy predating my tenure with the town is to have people who are putting in at least the apron part to be concrete and to meet a county standard. There's a number of them, but they're all concrete and they're all 7 inches. Part of it is an asphalt apron, takes one whack from a snow plow and it's going to disintegrate just like a curb does. The other party basically was doing some reconfiguration work on their property, not just limited to their driveway or their apron, but also some other parts to address some drainage issues. So I think part of it is if the goal was to have people construct new driveway facilities to limit parking on the street, the legislation does not do that.
To make sure I understand this correctly, if someone were to request a permit for installing or updating their driveway, they would be required to comply with county standards anyway, just through that permitting
For
process?
the apron, yes. So it is to be clear, it is a town permitting process, not a county, because the connection is to a street. So one of the two reimbursements we made, the person filed for a driveway permit. I basically said, hey, you have to, like I say, I don't know the history of that, but it is a good thing to do. You know, you need to upgrade your apron from asphalt. I will acknowledge they were initially not too thrilled about that. They said, hey, we do have this reimbursement process. And that seemed to alleviate the concern. That individual, that resident, did note the issue that I think came up in the 1970s, which was, you know, different people have different right of ways. So the work that they're doing may vary from property to property, depending on the right of way. In this case, one of the cases, the right of way was 15 feet. So they were saying, well, shouldn't I get 15 feet of town construction reimbursement, which oddly enough is one of the issues. So the two payments we've done, once again, were 2,900. I will say, in doing some additional research in preparation for this agenda item, and I apologize for this. I'm not sure how both Claire and I missed it, but essentially there actually was a rate set that we did not find originally when we were searching for a methodology. So the rate that was set was back in October of 1972. It was $3 per square yard for asphalt driveways. The minutes from that meeting state the following: for a standard 9-foot driveway, this would be $12 for the 4-foot town share. So clearly someone contemplated $12. Yours truly, I'm afraid to tell you, process reimbursement for $2,900. I do think that the $2,900 is in line with what we're actually paying as part of a larger contract. So that is likely not pricing that someone would get just from, a single vendor. We're doing it as part of a larger scope. So I think the questions for you all, I think in no particular order, do you want to continue this provision? Recognizing what the original goal was, and if you choose to keep it, I would give some thought, whether that be tonight or at a future meeting, as to whether or not you want to modify the language to more directly tie the reimbursement to some other overarching policy goal, whether that be off-street parking, or since somewhere over time, the town did evolve to meeting county standards for aprons. Do you want to keep the reimbursement, if nothing else, to assist folks with making that transition if they're going to do work? So I don't have an opinion on it one way or the other. I would just say the legislation certainly was not written in a way that matches the original intent and goal.
So my biggest concern on the whole thing, quite frankly, was making sure that we have control over the interface between the edge of the pavement up to some point on the homeowner's driveway, to ensure that, somebody's not putting down, for example, pavers, which, although very nice, they'll be ripped up in no time, and then we'll be repairing them or doing God knows what, or they set it at a different height or a different angle, different whatever. And so that's really where I was coming from.
Doesn't county code take care of that?
Well, remember, this is a connection to a town street, so the county has no permitting role in this. What I would say in light of, an issue that certainly you all are aware of. One of the things when we now get driveway permit applications, which I don't believe has been done in the past. I do send those to Clerk Azar to basically, I had one come in the other day. They were actually they were quoting a different standard than their actual building permit plans required them to do, but part of the benefit, I think, of having an engineer look at these is to make sure there's appropriate slope and drainage and things of that nature. We do have the engineering firm come out, and we are, obviously, you all raised the driveway permit fee earlier this year. We do have someone from Clark Azar come out and actually inspect the driveway apron after construction to make sure it actually meets the standard that the applicant submitted. So there's about a dozen different county driveway apron standards. So that's the process now, Phil. I think to your concern, we are basically making sure they're constructed properly and they're reviewed to make sure there's appropriate slopes for drainage issues.
So if we codified that in this particular, section, then I would be okay with that, not necessarily having to pay for it per se, just as long as we got it quite clear that.
I might add that, and under Joanna's tenure, one of the things is to try to, I've asked Clark Azar, it's not been a high priority to look at, is to actually develop some town standards that we can kind of actually have published on the website to give people more guidance. To Phil's point about pavers, I went through a stretch where I was dealing with lots of driveway issues, but someone in the midst of this, and they were not seeking reimbursement, but they wanted pavers. And they wanted pavers continuously for the aesthetic look of it. We talked about it. They still had to put a 7-inch concrete base on their apron. We did allow them to, because there's different standards all over town because of the time when people applied. We did allow them to basically install pavers on the apron, but their permit issuance made it very clear that if in any way their pavers on the apron were in any way dislodged, damaged, or anything else because of snow plowing up, that they were not eligible for the reimbursement rate.
Okay.
Because they were deviating from the typical town standard.
I would agree with codifying the county standards into the city streets. And then either not paying for the aprons or paying less for them. I mean, I just don't. I wonder if it's truly a public good. I mean, I don't, I think we're subsidizing private construction. And we should, and it seems like could be a private cost as it is in other parts of the county.
I would agree. Playing devil's advocate, I would say, that you could argue, well, it's in the town's right of way, so why shouldn't they build me an apron? But that's just the other side of the coin, if you want to look at it.
It's a benefit that's been used very minimally.
Yes.
It has been. We've had, Mary went through all the records, most of when she did a search of apron, most of what came up were the aprons that the town constructed as part of sidewalk projects. I think just as you kind of mull around, we've not had this specific instance come up, but obviously there are new homes going up in, Garrett Park from time to time. The building permit is one thing, the driveway permit is a separate issue. I'll just throw this out there, like if someone's building a new house, do you want to be paying for their driveway apron? Because that situation could easily come up with the number of new houses being constructed. So I think it touches a number of different things.
We could use that money to buy the apron for the remodel of town hall.
There you go.
Right. Well, there's no driveway at town hall.
No, that's true.
This curb cut for,
Yeah,
Folks,
this does seem to be a disconnect between, and it's an outdated provision that I think we either need to update with a repeal of the benefit of the town paying for the apron, or update it with a provision for what amount of reimbursement the town will provide. I would lean towards repealing it and just providing for the standard of what driveway aprons should meet instead.
I'm fine with that.
I mean, with the exception of if the town is doing work that
Right,
immediately
yeah, I'm fine.
impacts them,
Right.
then the town should, yeah.
Right, yeah, the Argyle one is including that apron, so, and that was included in a bunch of SRTS, so I think it's a ton of good points raised here. I fully agree with Phil. We need to do something where it codifies that we're gonna be keeping stormwater in the street, however that is done by a civil engineer. But I think Todd, you raised a good point, and Jerry Lee too, about whether it's worthwhile to pay for those. Like, I wonder if maybe there is, to me at least, there's still a glimmer of hope for it, like to pay for it if it's for a new driveway where there wasn't one before, or but not necessarily if you're moving it to the other end of the lot. But if you're adding one in quantity, maybe that still is arguable as a public good, but I think it's still
What's the
That's a lot, I
benefit
think.
to the town?
getting less street parking. So like
Okay.
getting cars off.
Drive. Opposed to no-
Yeah, either driveway or parking pad, getting more cars off the street. But I'm not sure that there are many cases left where a driveway or a parking pad is doable and there isn't one already. So it's probably very few. There's bunch of houses where it's too hilly to even put one in. So
And I would argue that it's a benefit to the homeowner to be able to drive their car up to the house or in their garage. So, to me, it's a benefit to the homeowner to have a driveway
Yeah.
and park next to their house.
Yeah, I don't know much about the history of this. There is a provision in the code, just while you're talking about parking facilities. And I'm trying to remember where I saw this, but basically I'm not sure if it's in the code or it's just by practice where people can put pavers down on town right of way and park. So, is that a practice you want to continue, or do you want to try to, and no pun intended, drive people to putting in an actual driveway as opposed to parking on pavers on town right of way?
I wonder if that one should be kicked back to Historic Preservation Committee, because we had a bunch of discussion about that. Like 10-ish years ago, when Nancy Schwartz led that committee, and I was thinking, yeah, it makes a ton of sense to like kind of get cars like scooped off, and because you see it all around town where cars are kind of like parallel parked off, like beyond the curb, or like almost like as a T, kind of like heading in towards the property. But Nancy had raised a good point back then that it kind of disrupts like the historic town plan, the lines of the curbs, the lines of the landscaping beyond. So I think it might be I think she raised some really good points back then. It might be worth having the current committee relook at that, to see if that should be discouraged or encouraged.
For purposes of a resolution tonight, is it just the sense of the council that we revisit this with specific reference to incorporating county standards? And looking at harder at whether we want to engage in any kind of reimbursement, and if so, how it should be calculated.
Do that at another town council meeting.
Maybe at a next meeting, or should we introduce the proposed change now and then formalize it at the next meeting?
Well, I don't think we have language that we
Yeah.
would actually introduce, so, the question is, do we have enough of a sense of the council to give direction for a draft ordinance to be created?
Yeah,
And I would also say we should split it two pieces. One would be reimbursement, and the second would be codification of whatever it is we want.
Otherwise,
The design, basically, yeah.
yeah, they don't have to be connected.
County needs
Right.
to know what the county would be. We'll start with the county ordinance and
Yeah.
those standards.
Well, we can talk to Jason and find out what he thinks. I mean, he probably uses stuff that's probably similar to what was in his bid docs for strikers, yeah.
Do we have a sense of council consensus, though, on whether we should be providing reimbursement or not?
I think that's why I was suggesting that perhaps do one discussion about the technical requirements and another about whether there's reimbursement or not. So it sounds like we need the technical requirements regardless, and then
Do
the
we need-
reimbursements is a separate question.
Are we convinced about the reimbursements? It seems like we're all supporting the end to the reimbursements. Is that true? Or, I mean, we want to wait and have the discussion later? There might be a run on aprons before we get.
the public policy behind the original notion of reimbursement, as I understand it, was to encourage people to build facilities so they weren't parking on the street. I believe that under the current building requirements, you have to provide off-street parking. Is that correct?
I believe
For a
so.
new building?
Yes.
Pretty sure it is.
So the question is whether the public policy still argues in favor of offering it to incentivize people who do not yet have off-street parking to consider it. And if so, what should be the measure? Initially, when I heard the earlier council thoughts on it were for payment for square footage, that seemed to make sense rather than having a flat figure. But there might be perverse incentives there for people to build bigger driveways than they might otherwise. So it seems to me that whole discussion is at least conceptually separate from the one about adopting county standards.
Yeah.
Seems much more clear cut. To the extent that we might be able to get language fairly quickly on that.
Right, and then they tied, but, oh, I'm sorry, I was gonna say it just might tie back to the two may get tied together, because when you do the county standard, we're probably gonna land with some square footage somewhere, which would help us with reimbursement, I'm thinking.
I built a house on a state highway on Bradley Boulevard, and I met with the Department of Transportation, and we got a waiver to be able to use asphalt aprons instead of concrete, but it sounds to me like what you're saying is that's not an option. We're gonna require people to put concrete aprons in any new driveway or that.
Yeah,
facility.
that was the practice before I came here.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unless it wants to be considered to have it be at the risk of the homeowner if the stormwater tops or if the apron doesn't hold up.
That's
something else.
I need to do concrete and asphalt, I know that.
Yeah.
Do we have general consensus that we want to repeal the reimbursement measure? And then separately address the standards for putting driveway?
I'd say so.
Yeah, I don't know what I mean, I think the benefit to the homeowners should be, is that is a lot bigger than what the town's benefit is, so I think it should be a private owner's cost.
And I did pull up the point, I think, the ordinance, Chris raised a great point about the requirement on parking, so section 17 or 713. C of our ordinance calls for 2 off-street parking spaces for any new dwelling unit. So that came up when we were discussing accessory dwelling units too. So if you already have a house and you have an accessory dwelling unit, then you would need 4. So that the town is already kind of covered for any kind of new construction based on that. So the question goes back to whether to incentivize additions on existing houses or off street.
Is that I mean, the discussion tonight seems fairly clear cut, but I'm not sure it wouldn't benefit from a little more thought on the reimbursement side. What do you think? We're clear on inserting a county standard or piggybacking on a county standard.
I'm not sure that new information would change my mind about the reimbursements, but I guess it's possible, so I guess, I mean, we can wait. I don't know. I think it
Do
was
we-
Charlie's idea.
Do we want to
I
hear,
wanted us to discuss it, we clearly
Yeah.
gotta have an ordinance that's outdated and proper.
do we want to hear what the residents, how the residents would weigh in on this? Our constituents, as it were?
Well, we would do that when we put the proposed repeal, when we introduce it.
I think the
Yeah.
best way to do that is come up with a
Give them
proposal.
specific.
But yeah,
And then get them to
Yeah.
react to it. Okay.
I agree. Part of the regular 2 meeting process where it would be introduced, and in this case, it would probably be 3, one where it's discussed further and introduced and voted.
Anything further on this?
so what's the plan to move it forward?
To give to our town attorney our sense that we want to rework the statute to expressly incorporate county standards, to remove the provision that provides for reimbursement. And I would ask him to otherwise look for obsolete elements or anomalies that would then not fit the general scheme.
Yeah, and it does seem like in line with some of the conversations we've had recently about communications with the public, we should make an extra effort to publicize our intent
Yes,
to revise this provision through the Bugle, through the listserv, so that residents don't find it surprised when we introduce the draft
that's right.
definition.
But still at the point where we have a little more specificity in terms of what we're gonna substitute.
Right,
Okay,
Yeah.
it does make sense.
I think as a
We have to
practical,
be clear about our
Yeah.
communication.
I think as a practical matter, that'll be September, since it'll be an ordinance. And we run into the timing problem.
Right.
We introduce it in July,
There's an extra month of discussion.
the clock runs,
Yeah,
okay? All right,
right.
Barb and Caleb, do you think you've captured that sufficiently?
Yes.
Okay. Town updates, Councilmember
Oh,
Bennett.
hang on a second now. Somewhere, did we vote on archivist? I do not believe we did, and I may have forgotten to mention it previously, so.
It's under your business. I
Yes. No.
apologize.
Okay.
So, Phil, if you hear us on the archives.
So, as we all know, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you're on, Claire will be leaving us because she has a new job position that doesn't allow her the ability to work as many hours as she has now. She's quite happy to be able to work with somebody new, and she's currently working on some transition documents to help the new person, whoever that will be, transition into the role. She's happy to help with any type of transition stuff she can. And she'll set a date based on a new hire date as to when she would actually be stepping down.
Are there resumes you're reviewing yet?
Taylor can answer that question.
So, Councilmember Max, I'm going to jump in. We received approximately 100 resumes for the position. Yes. So I went through each and every resume, all of their associated materials. I forwarded what shook out to be about 12 to Claire over the process of several weeks that had what I believe to be relevant experience, credentials, and interests. Of those 12, Claire provided feedback and we compiled a short list of 3. Those 3 were on a Zoom interview that included Claire, Town Manager Matthews, myself, and Archives Committee member and former Archives Committee Chair, Karen Teal. Karen was included because unfortunately our current committee chair, Malcolm Russell Einhorn, had some scheduling conflicts and we could not get him on there. So those 4, we went through the interviews, we got together in a small group, we compared notes. We had 2 clear frontrunners that we quite liked. Those 2 frontrunners were invited to come to the archives to have a one-on-one conversation with Claire, see what the Garrett Park Archive is like, because it is a distinctly unique setup and has some interesting materials. And we wanted to make sure that they were truly comfortable working in that setting, but also functioning as a solo archivist. Many of the folks that we looked at the application materials of were used to working in a larger archival setting where there was often a whole team. And so therefore they could specialize in a way that Claire as a lone ranger has not been able to do. The individual who was able to report for her one-on-one interview impressed Claire with her questions, with her knowledge, with her approach to work in the archives. What we're asking for tonight is for council to authorize the town manager, the mayor, as they see fit, to execute a contract with this individual. To be clear, the position is a contractor position. This is not an employee. These folks would not be getting a W-2. And as such, because it is a contract, it needs council's blessing. We're asking for this tonight because we are hoping to maximize the amount of time that we have with Claire to hand off and transition these documents, and so that we can keep the process moving at a good pace. I today was able to set up an appointment for Malcolm to get to have a conversation with our finalist candidate that we're very excited for. And assuming that Malcolm is as impressed with this individual as the search committee has been, I would like us to be in a position where we can make a prompt and swift offer rather than potentially lose out on a great candidate because we had to wait until the next council meeting. Councilmember Schultz earlier had asked about some pricing information, and I believe what we had come up with is in line with what had been budgeted for archival services for the upcoming fiscal year. If council has any questions, I'm happy to answer that. I am not providing the individual's name at this point until we have that final conversation, but I am optimistic that in July, we can make the official announcement, presuming all goes well.
And to that end, I'd like to make a motion. And I'd like to move that to authorize the mayor or town manager to execute with a candidate for archivist a not to exceed contract of $19,200.
Second,
A second.
any discussion?
I would just say that we should make the offer after Malcolm meets her and agrees.
Oh, absolutely. There's no plan to offer until we have Malcolm on board. And we do also require a background check based on the individual's background. From what she shared in interviews, I am not concerned about her passing the background check, but no offer until I have a clean background check in hand.
And is that amount of the contract about what this person is expecting?
Yes, we posted the hourly range and we posted the range of hours we would be looking for. So this person is smart and capable. I have no doubt that they were able to approximate what we were offering. We did also work with Claire to make sure that what we were offering was competitive on the market for archivists, particularly because we did have a need for someone who was part-time, and that does slightly shift the math. But this is competitive. This should be in line with what they're expecting.
Well, it sounds like a promising prospect. And we'll want to do everything we can to maximize the time that Claire has to overlap and help with the transition. So it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
I,
Good.
Thank you all very much, and I hope to have very good news for you in July.
Thank you, and I apologize again for overlooking the fact that that should be an action item. So now we'll move to town updates. And start with Councilmember Bennett about the Arboretum.
Two items. One is to just give a quick report about the tree walk that the arborist provided on May 26th. We had a really good showing.
it was fabulous. I was there. It was great.
It was fabulous.
It really
Over
was.
40 residents participated, and the archivist, or sorry, the arborist.
Yeah.
Provided some very good practical tips about for individual residents who are working with tree companies to have trees planted on their own properties. Also talked about the importance of protecting town trees in the right of way while doing construction, as well as explaining a lot of the history and the reasons and benefits of some of the selections of recent and long-term tree plantings in town. So very beneficial tree walk. The town or the committee will be meeting on June 19th at 7 p.m. here at Town Hall, I believe. And one of the topics they'll be covering, which was discussed at a recent meeting, is a process for tracking and monitoring the performance of the tree companies that do work for the town. And that's everything, subject to any questions.
Thank you. And if you're curious, you should just walk on Strathmore a bit now that the trees have been pruned. It's quite remarkable. They did a conservative job, and yet the street lights have been freed up, and we retain that sense of enclosure with the canopy. It's a very skillful job, and although there remains some to be done that will require traffic control.
And hopefully our contractor will do better traffic control than the state has been doing with
and Todd on the Historic Preservation Committee.
Yes, thank you. The mayor advised me that in fact there are 2 vacancies. One on the committee, one is for a full 3-year term and one is for an unexpired term ending in November. I will need, I guess I'll talk to Steve about integrating into the committee. I'll talk to you. Do you have 5 minutes after the meeting?
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, or some other time we could talk further about it. So.
We'll start now and then.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. So that's the update.
But just if I can insert, I would like to thank, as the outgoing council member from that committee, I'd like to thank Pamela Parker and Chris Keller for all their work I worked on with them. Great for the committee. So.
Here, here.
Unless anyone has anything else, I believe that concludes our business this evening, with the exception of I need a motion to enter into closed session.
I'm happy to make that motion.
All right. And a second.
I'll second if I can go to the restroom.
Sure. Yeah, well,
Do you need us to formally read the motion, or are you fine?
technically, yes.
Yes.
Does anyone,
I can read it. I'm just gonna read whatever
the staff has very kindly figured it out.
the staff was so nice to do. Okay, so I will, I guess, second or Lisa's motion to vote to enter closed session pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions, Article Section 3-305B1 to discuss the employment and compensation of an employee over whom the town council has jurisdiction and other personnel matters that affect a specific individual, period.
And it was moved, seconded, and adopted that we go into closed session. So we will recess for 5 minutes.